I'm not sure if that's coming back on. I turned it off and things to make sure that this is on. Okay. I love the sense of the playfulness and the beauty of the raven with that. Just, I love it combined together. Ah. Do you feel freshened by music? I do. Yeah. Pardon me? Is my microphone not on? I'm on up here. Can everybody hear me on the microphone? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. So our theme this year has been creating a world that works for all, and our theme this month has been working with the idea of a kinship for all life, or kinship with all life. That we are in a state of kinship with everything. And part of this comes from our global heart vision of the overall organization, which says we see a world in which kinship with all life prospers. And so I thought, first of all, let's define kinship. What is kinship? And so Merriam-Webster says the kinship is the state of being related to people in your family, and it is a feeling of being close or connected to other people. As we all know, we have family of birth and then we have family of choice, right? We have families we kind of create and move into as we go through our lives. But what the larger idea of this is that we are all of us on this planet, human life, animal life, plant life, the planet itself, all of us are family. And so that we're in a kinship with all of that life, all of that. We're one with that. And so this month we're taking a look at that oneness with all life. And I love Reverend Mary's opening prayer today because, as a friend of mine once told me, or a teacher of mine once told me, if you're not talking paradox, you're not talking God. So God is simultaneously this and this, which cannot seem to exist together, right? And so God is simultaneously oneness and individualized uniqueness and quality, right? So all of that is God. And yet it's all underneath that one. And so I love that. Thank you for that distinction in the prayer. That we are truly unique. Each of us is truly unique and at the same time truly one. Ain't that cool? So the physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson says, we have a genetic kinship with all life on Earth. We're the same genes. Okay, we're not wearing the same genes, but we have the same genetic makeup, okay? With all of life on Earth, all of life comes out of the same gene pool. We're all connected. And he goes on to say, and we have an atomic kinship to all matter in the cosmos. Now, I love that phrase that we are all stardust. We're all the stuff of stars made into human form. And so we have a relationship to everything in the universe at the atomic level, right? Yes? Yes. And he goes on to say, so when I look at the universe, I feel large because I remind myself that not only are we living in this universe, but the universe is living within us. Feel that for a moment. I am living in the universe, and the universe is living within me. Isn't that great? Isn't that a powerful experience? You know, sometimes when I look up at the stars at night, I feel kind of small and insignificant. You know, and sometimes it's good to have that little perspective. You know, it's like I take a look at problems I'm working with, and then I look up at the stars and go, is this really going to matter in 10,000 years? Is whether Cynthia had more of the brownie than I did really going to matter in 10,000 years? And the answer is yes, but well, no. The answer is no, it's not. You know, and so we can look at our problems with that beautiful perspective from the universal visual. I sometimes like to invite people when they have a big problem to say, okay, so think of that problem in terms of it feels to you like as if you're standing at the base of Mount Shasta looking up, right? And it's like, yeah, that's what it feels like, man. It's like, 10,000 feet big. I say, okay, great. Get in a plane and go up to about 40,000 feet and fly over Mount Shasta, look down. How big does it look? Oh, not that big. Okay, great. Get up in the space shuttle or on the space station and go take a look at Mount Shasta from there. How big does it look? Not that big, okay? Go out a couple of planets, a couple of solar systems across and take a look at Mount Shasta. wait, I can't even see Mount Shasta from a couple of solar systems away, okay? And so we enlarge our perspective to what I call looking at it with God's eyes. This is the old, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Instead of telling God how big our problem is, we tell our problem how big our God is. Okay? And so we put that in perspective. But I love this Neil Tyson's idea that we look at the universe and we also simultaneously feel large, because we are that. We are connected with every one of those stars, planets, galaxies that we can see and that we see through the telescopes of the universe. We are that. So we truly are family. And we would have to admit, if we talked about it, because of the uniqueness that we all have, that some of us in the family are a little more functional than others. We all have families like that, right? Or well, maybe we don't, but because we've all healed all of our stuff and all of our families, but we've seen people with other families that have some dysfunction going on in them, right? Okay? And so I'm reminded of John Bradshaw. I don't know if anybody remembers John Bradshaw from the 80s, worked with dysfunctional families. Anybody? Yeah. So he had this wonderful metaphor of the mobile. And he would bring a mobile, one of those little hanging works of art. And he would say a dysfunctional family, stays stationary. Everybody knows their role. Everybody's stuck in their role, and staying in that role. And as long as nobody comes out of that role, the family is safe, but not really healthy or functional. All it takes is not to move the whole mobile, but all it takes to move the mobile is for one person to touch one part of the mobile. For one of us to changes the whole family. We're interconnected. Okay? We're interconnected. So all it takes for us to start to change and create a better world, a world that works truly for all, is for one of us to change. And as we change, it flows outwards. Have you ever been in a situation with somebody, maybe a spouse or a situation at work where you're having a difficult time and finally you decide that you're going to change? You're going to shift how you're relating to that person? And do you ever notice that how you relate to that person then starts to shift how they relate back to you? Right? Yes? Okay. So we're looking at that today. We're looking at the idea that we touch on one piece of life, one piece of consciousness, and it all shifts. John Muir, the great environmentalist from the late 1800s, early 1900s, said, when we try and pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. When we try and pick up anything by itself, we find it hitched, we find it connected, we find it attached to everything in the universe. Now, I could talk about that for a while, but I have a wonderful example, a little 4.5-minute video that we're going to show that talks about that illustrates that process. So, Damien, if you could cue us up, and I'm going to step aside here for a moment.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years, that the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds, of migratory birds, started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed, more pools formed, more riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitat. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. If I remember right, that initial introduction was 12 wolves into an area as big as Yellowstone Park. 12 wolves to start that process going. So how this works in one place is how it works everywhere, right? Because it's all connected. How we do one thing in our life is how we do everything in our lives. And so if we want to look at that, we might ask ourselves the question, so in whose park do we need to make the changes? Is it somebody else's park? Is it our own park? Yeah. We need to make the changes if we want to have a different result. And what I want to say is the wolves did not come in there and say, hi, we're going to re-engineer the rivers. They didn't do that, right? They just came in and were themselves. They just did what wolves do. They lived as their authentic self, in alignment with that self. Ernest Holmes tells us that if we think we can guide our brother aright while our own feet still walk in darkness, we are mistaken. We must first clarify our own vision, and then we shall become as lights, lighting the way for others. So our work is to become lights. Our work, as we want to create a world that works for all, is not to point at somebody else or something else or some other organization and say they need to change, but for us to become the lights, for us to become the place where that happens, rather than trying to fix others. So if the wolves represent our true authentic nature, our balanced nature within ourselves, if the wolves represent, in a way, our own wildness, where in our lives would we like to reintroduce some of that wildness, that authenticity of who we are? I invite you to contemplate that for a moment, to think about that. Where in my life do I need to reintroduce my own authentic, balanced nature, my own perhaps wildness? See, a lot of us learn to condition our wildness out of ourselves when we were young, right? Don't do this because it'll upset somebody's apple cart, and that apple cart will fall over on you and make you miserable. Okay? We get people who judge us and criticize us if we're not, quite the same. This past week we had one of our great artists, Prince, who passed away. And Prince was known for being just the same as every other musician, right? No. Very unique, right? Very out there, very, gender bending, visual bending, music bending, all this stuff. Okay? Played on the edges of where many people were afraid to go. Okay? And we honor him because of that, because of his specialness, because of his wildness, because of his, wolf nature, if you will, his uniqueness. We honor other people who are like that because of their wildness and their uniqueness and their willingness to not just sit around and say, how can I fit in? And so I invite you to look at where it is in your own life that you would like to start to release your own wildness, your own vibrant aliveness, your own true spiritual nature, and start to be willing to say yes to that nature. It doesn't have to be all of a sudden, okay? But to allow more of it to flow. See, when the wolves took over and started to move that, modify that, if we want to use the flow of the rivers as a metaphor for the flow of spirit, the flow of spirit became more stabilized and more focused in the park, right? It wasn't constantly changing. It wasn't, having eroding banks fall into it and stuff like that. It strengthened the banks. If we live our authentic self, if we start to be in alignment with who we truly are, we strengthen our own corridors through which we allow Spirit to flow in our lives. And the flow becomes more powerful, more deep, more clear for us. So where can we allow ourselves to let that wildness into our lives? Now remember, this is the tough part, right? We teach that this teaching has some tough teachings, okay? This is one of them. When we introduced the wolves back in, something had to die, right? In this case, he called it the deer. He's British, and so I understand that the Brits call elk deer. They have a deer elk name for it, something like that. Those are mostly elk they were showing in the pictures, right? Okay, so the elk and the deer died in some cases. Not all of them, but they culled them. They reduced the numbers because they had been living there for 70 years without any predators. And so in a way, you might say the population had gotten fat, lazy, and could just roam wherever they wanted to, graze wherever they wanted to, had actually outgrazed themselves, overgrazed the land. I remember a story of Captain James Cook when he was exploring the Indian area, the area around India, came across an island that was unpopulated and a nice grassy island. He thought, well, I'll leave a couple of rabbits here for the next sailors who come, so I'll have a little bit of meat. Put two rabbits on this island. Came back a few years later, there were no rabbits and there was no grass. Because all the rabbits had multiplied, of course, as rabbits do, eaten all the grass, and then starved to death. Okay? So, if we have parts of our lives that are not reined in, that are not balanced with other parts of our lives, where we get fat and lazy is where, when we reintroduce the part of ourselves that really is authentic, we start to have to say, this might be a little uncomfortable, but for the long run, in the greater good, in the greater aspect of my life, it's better to do this. Sometimes we have to make health changes we don't like to make. Sometimes we have to make career choices we don't want to make. Sometimes we have to actually look at ourselves in the relationship instead of looking at our partner, right? Oh, I hate that part. And start to see, where can I be more loving? Where can I be more communicative? So it's the question that we can ask ourselves is, what am I willing to let die off that no longer serves me? That no longer serves the fullness and the wholeness of my life? And that's the tough part. And the longer we've been kind of fat and lazy about some area of our life, the harder it is to shut that down, right? The more I keep eating, really good chocolate cake, the harder it is to quit. I've found that. Just in case anybody wants to go there. I know none of you know about that, but. So as I allow myself to rebalance, then all of life begins to rebalance. As I begin to become a more balanced person within all of life, life itself grows in its balance. So this week I want to invite you to take on 3 spiritual practices in this alignment, in this way. The first one is to contemplate my oneness with all of life. Spend some time contemplating, just noticing, being aware of your oneness with all life. Ernest Holmes says, all nature shows a divine relatedness. I have but to contemplate the blade of grass, the growing leaf, or the solar system, to see that that which has created me has shaped and arranged all things to prosper and to exist in harmony. So how would it be this week if you contemplated a blade of grass, a growing leaf, or looked up in the sky and contemplated the stars, and contemplated our oneness with life? So I invite you this week to take a little time to do that. We talk about taking the time to smell the roses. How about taking the time to contemplate the roses and their oneness with all of life and our oneness with the roses? The second thing then is to ask, where does the wildness of my true nature need to be reintroduced? Where does the wildness of my true nature need to be reintroduced? And what does that look and feel like? And when I reintroduce that, who am I really? Who am I really? Am I really kind of a toned down person, or am I really a person who allows that wildness, that aliveness, that vibrancy, that passion for life to be present in my life and to express in ways that are wonderful and healthy? And finally, when you get an answer to that, say yes. Just say yes. Yes, I'm willing to have that wildness be reintroduced into my life. Yes, I'm willing to allow that to happen. I'm willing to allow myself to be more than what I am now, to be more of the authentic being that I truly am than I even am being right now. And so open your heart to your greatness. Open your heart, because this is not work that is done in the intellect, okay? This is work that is done in the heart. And so as you contemplate our oneness, as you ask where's that wildness, and as you say yes, do that process in your heart rather than in your head. And allow yourself to truly feel it. Are you willing to take that on as a spiritual practice this week? Yes. Those 3 things. Cool. Oh! Maybe we'll start with every service with a howl. So I'm going to close with a quote from the poet Ian Thomas. He says, "And every day the world will drag you by the hand, yelling, 'This is important, this is important, and this is important. You must worry about this, and this, and this.' And each day it's up to you to yank your hand back, put it on your heart, and say, 'No, this is what's important.'" I invite you to take your time this week to put your hand on your heart and say, "This is what's important." Let's move into prayer. Yes. And so as they open to that infinite presence, that one life, the aliveness that shows up in so many unique ways and yet is also one simultaneously, we open to that aliveness. We recognize that because it is all there is, that we must be one of it. There's nowhere else to be. We are one of that vibrant aliveness. We are one of the passion that scatters stars and galaxies across the sky. We are one of beautiful places like Yellowstone Park, like the ocean, like our own backyard, like the person right in front of us. We are one. Each of us is a miracle. Each of us is a universe in form. Each of us is interconnected with all of life. And so I speak my word that as we bring our own uniqueness into this life, into this interconnected web of life, we allow ourselves to do so with joy, with wisdom, with love, with passion. with a bit of wildness, because nature has that wildness in it. And so that bit of wildness must be a part of the divine. We allow ourselves to play full out who we truly, truly are. Each of us knows that at our core. And so I speak my word again, that we say yes to that truth of who we are, to that power of who we are, to that glory of who we are. And know that as we do so, it blesses us, blesses every aspect of our lives. That which no longer serves us falls away with ease and grace. And brings balance, wholeness to our lives. And that we then bring balance and wholeness to all of life by simply being who we are. And I'm grateful for each person who's saying yes to this. I'm grateful for each of us who is saying, yes, I will howl in my life. Because I know that as we howl, as we allow the aliveness, the joy, the song of the divine to move through us, to move through our hearts, to move through our bodies, to move through our beings, that we allow ourselves to grow greater and greater good, to be more and more spirit. And so I release this word into a law that moves it into form, moves it into expression right here and right now in our lives. We say yes to that process. We say yes to this growth. We say yes to this heart opening and life opening. And we let it be, knowing that yes is sufficient, that allowing it is sufficient to bless us, to bless everyone. And together we affirm that by saying, and so it is. Thank you.